Mornings used to be my favorite time of day. The quiet hum of the coffee machine, the soft shuffle of bare feet against the kitchen floor, the way the first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains, it was my moment of peace. But today, that peace was shattered by a simple phrase, "I'll be back on Sunday, don't miss me too much." Kissing me on the cheek, Caitlin Kate Hunter gave me the same practiced smile she always did before a trip. But something was different this time. Her voice was too light, too casual, as if she were playing a role she no longer cared about perfecting. And her eyes, they held none of the warmth they used to. She walked out the door, her designer suitcase rolling smoothly behind her. I stood there for a moment, my coffee growing cold in my hands, staring at the empty space she left behind. For months, a nagging feeling had been gnawing at me. At first, I dismissed it. Work trips were part of her job, weren't they? But as time went on, inconsistencies started piling up. Small, almost imperceptible at first, missed calls, vague explanations, a perfume I didn't recognize clinging to her clothes. Then there were the trips that never seemed to have any paper trail. No emails confirming flights, no receipts for hotels. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But belief without proof is just willful ignorance. This time, I decided not to ignore it. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the tracking app we had installed years ago, back when we still played at being a perfect couple who shared everything. Her location flickered on the screen. Not a hotel, not an office building, a house, a secluded cabin an hour outside the city. My pulse quickened, a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Not even a good lie this time, just the bare minimum effort, as if she had already written me off as too blind, too trusting. Fine, if she thought I was blind, she was about to learn just how well I could see in the dark. I packed a bag, nothing big, just enough to get by. Slipping into my car, I drove, the city lights fading behind me as I headed toward the truth that would either break me or set me free. The closer I got, the heavier the air became. My grip tightened around the steering wheel. My mind played out every possible scenario. Was she alone? No, of course not. She wouldn't rent out a cabin just to sit in solitude. And if she wasn't alone, who was with her? I already knew the answer. It didn't matter how much I prepared myself. Seeing it with my own eyes was going to be a different kind of pain. But pain wasn't the enemy. Ignorance was, and tonight I was done being ignorant. The cabin stood at the end of a long, winding road, hidden behind towering pines. A perfect little retreat. Secluded, quiet, untouched by the outside world. A place meant for lovers who wanted to... I killed the engine and let the silence wrap around me. The night was deep and endless, a thick veil that swallowed sound, but the faint glow from the cabin's windows cut through the darkness. They were inside. I gripped the small camera in my hand, the weight of it grounding me. I wasn't here to make a scene, not yet. I was here to see, to gather, to make sure when the knife twisted, it didn't just wound, it destroyed. Moving through the trees, I stayed low, my footsteps careful against the bed of pine needles. The cabin's wooden deck creaked under the weight of careless bodies inside. Laughter floated through the air, light, unburdened. Her laugh. My stomach twisted, but I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I reached the window and took my first real look inside. Kate stood near the fireplace, a wine glass dangling from her fingers, her body leaning into a man I had known for over a decade. David Reyes, my best friend. The betrayal was so sharp it almost knocked the air from my lungs. He wasn't just standing close, he was touching her, tracing circles along her wrist, whispering things that made her smile in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years. I knew that smile. I used to be the reason for it. And now I was just the fool watching from the outside. They moved in sync, comfortable, practiced. This wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. This was something that had been happening long enough for them to forget that the world outside even existed. Forgetting that I existed, I raised the camera and hit record. The lens framed everything, the way she reached up to touch his face, the way his hands settled on her hips, the way their lips met with the kind of hunger that belonged to people who thought they were untouchable. My heart should have been pounding, my hands should have been shaking, but instead I was calm. Because now I had what I came for. Still, I didn't move. Not yet. I watched them, the way he poured her another drink, the way she curled up against him like she had done with me so many nights before. I listened to their voices, the way they murmured in low tones, words I didn't need to hear to understand. I had been erased, replaced, but not for long. A plan began forming, sharp and deliberate. This wouldn't be some messy confrontation. No, that was what they expected. That was the kind of thing weak men did. Men blinded by rage, men who let their emotions rob them of power. I wasn't that man. I slipped back into the shadows, unseen. Tonight wasn't about revenge. Not yet. Tonight was about patience. Let them laugh, let them drink, let them enjoy their stolen moments. Because soon, very soon, they would learn what it felt like to have the world they built together burn to the ground. I drove back in silence, the night stretching endlessly ahead of me. The roads were empty, the glow of distant streetlights casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. The image of Kate and David together played in my head, frame by frame like a film I couldn't turn off. The way her fingers traced his jawline, the way his lips brushed against hers, the way they looked at each other as if I had never existed. The rage should have consumed me, but I refused to let it. I wasn't going to let raw emotion dictate my next move. This had to be done right. By the time I reached my house, dawn was creeping over the horizon, spilling pale orange light across the sky. It felt surreal, as if the world should have stopped the moment I realized everything I had built was a lie. But life had no interest in my suffering. It moved forward, indifferent to the destruction left in its wake. I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. The house felt different now, colder. Every corner held a memory, but now they felt distant, like echoes from another life. Kate's perfume still lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with everything. That trust was gone now. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and connected the camera. The footage loaded, the screen flickering to life with the harsh reality of my betrayal. I forced myself to watch it again. Every painful second. Then I began collecting the pieces of their downfall. Over the next few days, I worked methodically, piecing together everything I needed. I went through bank statements, tracked Kate's spending, traced payments she had made that didn't align with our finances, lavish dinners, hotel stays that never involved business, gifts that had no recipient listed. She had been funding their affair with our money, and she hadn't even tried to hide it. David was worse. I dug into his business records, into the financial dealings he had kept just below the surface. Things I had ignored because I had been too blind, too trusting. There it was. Fraud, embezzlement, money siphoned from deals that should have been clean. He was sloppy. He had always relied on charm and arrogance, assuming no one would look too closely. Now I was looking. I reached out to a contact, an old friend from my university days who had built a career in corporate investigations. Within hours, he had confirmed what I suspected. David had been laundering money through shell companies, funneling funds into personal accounts disguised as business expenses. It was almost too easy. By Friday, I was ready. I sent an email to Kate's boss attaching a folder of evidence detailing her business trips, the ones she had taken under the company's name but never actually attended. The footage of her at the cabin wasn't necessary for this part. I needed her downfall to begin from within, to strip away the foundation she had built her security on. For David, I prepared something much more destructive. I scheduled an anonymous tip to the Financial Crime Division, attaching the documents exposing his embezzlement. The authorities wouldn't hesitate to act. White-collar crime wasn't ignored when millions were at stake. But that wasn't enough. No, I wanted him to feel the walls closing in, to watch as everything he had worked for turned to dust. So I called his wife. "Laura," I said when she answered. Her voice was groggy, tired. She had probably just woken up. "Mark?" Confusion laced her tone. "It's early. What's going on?" "I need to show you something." An hour later, she sat across from me in a quiet cafe, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the photos, the videos, the proof of her husband's infidelity. The color drained from her face, her breath shallow, sharp. "How long?" she whispered. "Over a year," I said. Her lips pressed together, a war waging behind her eyes. "I trusted him. I defended him." She exhaled shakily, setting the phone down. "He's going to lose everything, isn't he?" "Yeah." She looked at me, then something unreadable passing across her face. "I want to help." By the time Kate returned on Sunday evening, the first cracks in her world had already formed. She stepped through the door, dropping her bags by the entrance. I watched from the kitchen, waiting. Her smile was tired but forced, her body language careful. "You're home early," she said, her voice light, casual, as if she hadn't spent the weekend wrapped around another man. I nodded, sipping my drink. "Yeah, things changed." She hesitated. Something in my tone must have unsettled her. "Huh, Mike." Her phone buzzed. Then again. She frowned, pulling it from her pocket. Her eyes scanned the screen, and I watched as her face paled, her breath hitching. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning concern. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw fear in her eyes. It was only the beginning. Kate's hands tightened around her phone as she read the messages flooding her screen. Her face, so composed just moments ago, paled with each passing second. Her breathing grew uneven, shallow. She looked at me, confusion battling with panic in her eyes. Mark, what is this? I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the silence settle between us. I wanted her to feel it, the uncertainty, the fear. I don't know, I said, my voice smooth, almost indifferent. Why don't you tell me? She swallowed hard and turned away, her fingers moving frantically over her phone screen. She was trying to call someone, David, no doubt. I watched as the call failed, then another and another. Her world was cracking, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. She looked up at me again, this time with something closer to suspicion. Did you do something? I raised an eyebrow. Do what, Kate? I could see it now, the moment she started putting the pieces together. She had spent so long believing herself untouchable, so certain that her carefully constructed lies would remain intact. But now, everything was unraveling too fast for her to stop it. She tried again to call David, her hands shaking as she pressed the phone to her ear. This time, it connected. David? Her voice was urgent, desperate. I couldn't hear his words, but I didn't need to. I could see the way her expression shifted, how her shoulders tensed, how her lips parted in shock. What do you mean they froze the accounts? She hissed into the phone. This is impossible. Oh, there it was. David's financial empire was collapsing, just as I had planned. The authorities had moved quickly, and the moment his accounts were flagged, everything else followed. His company was under investigation, his assets locked down, and Kate was about to realize that the luxury she had surrounded herself with was built on a foundation of sand. She turned back to me, her voice lower now, trembling. Mark, tell me what you did. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You lied to me, Kate, for over a year. You spent our money on him. You used me. And you thought I wouldn't find out? Her eyes flashed with something. Guilt? Fear? Anger? It didn't matter. This is crazy, she whispered. You had no right. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. No right? You had no right to any of it. And now you're going to lose everything. The front door slammed open, and we both turned in unison. David's wife, Laura, stood there, her face a mask of cold fury. Kate's mouth fell open, a strangled noise escaping her lips. Laura, don't, Laura snapped, stepping inside. Don't say a word. Kate stumbled back a step, her composure finally breaking. This is a misunderstanding, she started, but Laura just laughed. A misunderstanding? You think I don't know? She threw her phone onto the counter, and the screen lit up with the damning evidence. Photos, bank statements, text messages, proof of every stolen moment, every stolen dollar. Kate looked at me, pleading now. Mark, I shook my head. You don't get to ask me for anything, Kate. She turned back to Laura. I never meant to hurt you. Laura's lip curled. You didn't hurt me. You destroyed yourself. And then, as if the universe had perfect timing, Kate's phone buzzed one last time. She looked down at it, dread etched into her features. Her job, her company knew. Kate's breath hitched as she read the message. Termination. Effective immediately. No severance, no references. I watched as the realization hit her. She had lost everything. She swayed slightly, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out, but there was none. Laura stepped closer. Do you know what David's doing right now? She asked. He's cutting you loose. That's what men like him do when things go south. He's in survival mode now. And you're just collateral damage. Kate's lip trembled. No, he wouldn't. Laura arched an eyebrow. Try calling him again. Kate did. The call went straight to voicemail. A small broken sound escaped her lips. David was gone. She looked at me, her expression one of pure, desperate panic. Mark, please? I tilted my head, watching her closely. Please what, Kate? Tears welled in her eyes. Please, help me fix this. I let out a slow breath and leaned back in my chair. Fix this? I repeated. You don't fix something that's already burned to the ground. She let out a choked sob, her hands shaking. Laura turned on her heel and strode toward the door. I've done what I needed to do. You're his problem now, she said, nodding at me before walking out. Kate turned back to me, her voice breaking. I never wanted this. I studied her for a long moment, then stood. Neither did I. I walked past her, grabbing my coat. She reached for me, but I stepped away. You have nowhere to go, Kate, I said softly. But that's not my problem anymore. And with that, I left her standing there, alone in the ruins of her choices. I stepped out into the night, leaving Kate behind in the silence of a home that no longer felt like mine. The air was crisp, the distant hum of the city, a quiet reminder that life outside this house continued, indifferent to the destruction that had unfolded within its walls. I didn't look back. My car was parked down the street, away from the home that just days ago had been a symbol of my life's stability. Now it was nothing more than a graveyard for the trust I had foolishly placed in a woman who never deserved it. Sliding into the driver's seat, I exhaled, gripping the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. Where to now? I had spent so much time carefully orchestrating my revenge that I hadn't really thought about what came after. The anger, the need for retribution, it had kept me moving, kept me focused. But now that it was over, now that Kate and David had reaped exactly what they had sown, I found myself staring at the empty road ahead, realizing that I had nothing left tying me here. And that wasn't a bad thing. I drove without a destination, letting the roads guide me. My mind drifted back to the last look on Kate's face. Desperation, fear, disbelief. She had spent over a year living a double life, and now, in a matter of days, it had all collapsed around her. Her job gone, her reputation shattered, her lover vanished. And as for David, well, I had no doubt that his days of luxury were over. The authorities would take care of the rest. By now, he was either scrambling for an escape or sitting in some cold interrogation room, realizing just how deeply he had dug his own grave. I could have smiled at the thought, but I didn't. There was no pleasure in what I had done, no satisfaction in watching the destruction play out. The only thing I felt was relief that I wasn't the fool anymore, relief that I was free. The road stretched out before me, endless and open. I thought about where I could go, somewhere far from this city, this life. Maybe a quiet town by the coast where the air smelled of salt instead of lies. Or maybe I didn't need to run at all. Maybe I just needed to rebuild. I pulled over at a quiet overlook, the city skyline twinkling in the distance. Stepping out of the car, I leaned against the hood, taking in the view. It felt different now. Less like a place I had been trapped in, more like a place I could choose to leave behind. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting another desperate message from Kate, but it wasn't her. It was a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, a name from a time before all of this, before marriage. Mark, heard you back in town. Let's grab a drink, catch up. I stared at the message for a long moment, then for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. Maybe I didn't need to plan my next move just yet. Maybe all I needed to do was take the first step forward. I typed out a reply, hit send, and slid my phone back into my pocket. Then I got into my car and drove. Not away from something, but towards something new.